Okay, Freilich and Chanukah, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. As we are sponsored by Shalom Fogel, and Nishmas Yaakov Zev, Ben Yehuda Arya, Rivka Bas Yaakov Yosef, Tivya Miriam Bas God, Yosef Ben Tzim Ben Yaakov Zev, Refuah Shalema for Moshe Arya Ben Miriam, and for great shidduch for Chayat Tivya Bas Shoshana Gittel, we're sponsored by Baruch Ian, Lina Nishmas Yaakov Chaim Ben Abba, Esther Bas Yonah, Avram Ben Shmuel HaKohen, Refuah Shalema for Liba Bas Anya. We're sponsored by A.B. Spry. We're sponsored for the spiritual, emotional, physical protection for Yeshua and Menachem Mendel Ben Be'el Shendel Rivka. We're sponsored by Mark Frankel, loving memory of Yisrael Tzvi Ben Chaim Yeshua Falak, and by Berish Gersamin, L'Refuah Shalema for Shoshana Bas Adina Chana. L'Refuah Shalema. David Menashe Halevi, Ben Rachel. Okay, Freilich and Chanukah, everyone. By the way, tomorrow night the shir will not be on Miketz. The shir will be on Chanukah. Chanukah Gems 5786 after the daf tomorrow. Be'ezus Hashem. We're holding four lines from the bottom of Daf Tzadik Beis Amud Beis. 4 lines from the bottom of Daf Tzadik Beis Amud Beis. Boi minei Levi, nites mi beged lebeged mahu. If the blood spurts onto a beged, and it rebounds from that beged to another beged, does the second beged have to be washed? Do we say mi beged kama itchile lekibus? Do we say that once it left the first beged, it's rejected from necessitating any further washing? Or perhaps not? Amalei, so the Gemara says, Zu she'ela, is this a question? Ton kibas mamanav shach. The second beged needs washing regardless. And in the olden days we would say irregardless, but they say that's not necessary. Regardless is enough. Because mamanav shach. If you would gather it off the first beged and still be able to use it, so then then it's kosher blood, which then goes on the second garment that needs to be washed. The apostle, but if you would gather it up from the first beged, you wouldn't be able to put it on the mizbeach. But so what? Rabbi Akiva, we hold like Rabbi Akiva, the Amar Hoysala Shasa Kaishav and Nifsala. If the blood was once good and only afterwards became disqualified, Damatoin Kibas. And this blood was good and only became disqualified when it went on the first beged. So then when it goes on the second beged, it's a case of where it had a Shasa Kaishav, so it needs to be laundered anyway. Okay. Now, here's an interesting question. What happens if the blood sprays on a beged that's tummy, on clothing that's tummy? If it sprays on a tummy dika beged, what's the din? Now, that means, from the fact that you're asking the question, that means you hold that even if it had a shasa kosher, it still doesn't need to be laundered if it's puzzle now. Because if you hold if it had a shasa kosher, it needs to be laundered. Well, this had a shasa kosher before it became tummy. So then what is the question? The question is where it's simultaneous. When the blood went on the beged, it was good blood. It became tummy as it contacted the beged. So do we say where it's simultaneous, it needs to be washed because it was tar at the moment of contact? And that's the Gemara now defines the question before we go any further. Since the Gemara is clearing this shaila, that if it had a shasa kosher, if it was good, because obviously before it touched the beged that was tummy was good, v'nifsala ain't damaton kibbutz. Normally it wouldn't need to be washed. But our question is, hani mili b'zeach hazeh, if it became puzzled first and then came into contact with the beged. Aval babas achas, when it happened simultaneously, the blood was good, just the beged was tamei. So when it touched it, it was good, and then simultaneously it became tamei. Do you need to wash it there? So it could be hani mila bizach hazeh, aval babas achas, but where it happened simultaneously, like maybe there you need to wash it. Perhaps since it became tamei when it contacted it, it was disqualified, and it doesn't need to be washed. We're holding 6 lines from the top of Daf Tzadik Gimel Amud Aleph. 6 lines from the top of Daf Tzadik Gimel Amud Aleph. So now the Gemara takes us a little bit in a circuitous route to find out this question, a very circuitous route. Amalei plukter de Rabbi Lazar v'Rabban. This is a mouthful. It seems to be a machlokes between Rabbi Lazar and Rabbanan. Aliba de Rabba, according to the version of Rabba, ukudikamatritz Abaya, the way Abaya explained it. Whoa, that's a mouthful. Remember, we're looking for whether something that happens simultaneously is different than it happens one after another. So now the Gemara takes us on a little journey. Should talk to you about it outside. There is a question if we know that a clay cheres is metame me'avirai. An earthenware vessel is metame something when it goes into its ear space. Let's say there's a sheretz in the earthenware vessel, and something goes into the ear space, it becomes tamei even if it doesn't touch the sheretz, because the ear space of the earthenware vessel is considered as if it's suffused with the tumah. This we know. That's given. Question is, what about if you pass over the ear space of the clay cheres, but you don't dip into its interior? So the Tanya, Rebbe Eliezer says, Meichatas shenitmu. Now meichatas is, of course, we call it water of lustration. That's the water mixed with the ashes of a paraduma, which we know we use to sprinkle on the 3rd and the 7th day to purify one who is contaminated by the dead. So Rebbe Eliezer says a very big chiddush. He says, Meichata shenitmu. If the water of lustration, if this water became itself contaminated, still mitarin, still it's able to purify one who is a tamei meis. What's the raya? The raya is because nobody says that a woman that's a nida has to wait until she's tar before she becomes purified from the dead. So here she's a woman that's tamei. She's an avatuma. She's metame anything that gets into contact with her. And yet we could purify her with the water of the meichatas, even though the water of the meichatas, when it comes in contact with her, is going to become tamei. So we see from there that even though the meichatas is tamei, you could purify with it. Pretty good, nice raya. Shari nida mazin oleh, because the nida, although she's tamei, we don't have to wait until she becomes tar from her nidas to apply the meichatas tar. So even though the meichatas becomes tamei upon contact with the nida, it still purifies her. V'amar Rabba, Rabbi Eliezer b'shitas Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Amra. Rabbi Eliezer is saying like the shita of Rabbi Akiva is Rabbi. D'amar havoras keli al gabe mokum tomei, that if you pass something over the airspace of a tomei b'dika place, it's kemunach dami. It's as if it rested inside the item. This, remember what I said. It's a question, if you pass something over the airspace of a klei cheres, does it become tomei if there's a sheretz in the klei cheres? Or do we say that it's as if it rested in the interior? The Tanan, for we learned in the Mishnah, if let's say Dr. Block was standing, there was an oven against the wall, and the wall above the oven was a window. In that window, there was a vessel of mechatas. Now, Dr. Block stretches his hand. So, remember, the oven is open from the top. Dr. Block is standing outside the oven. The oven is between him and the wall. V'sheretz betana. There's a sheretz in the oven. V'hoishid yodai l'chaloin. And Dr. Block sticks his hand to the windowsill. V'notoles halogin. And he takes the flask that has the mechatas in it. Ve'aviro al pitaner. And he passes it over the oven. Rabbi Akiva metame. Rabbi Akiva says it's tamei because he holds that passing it over the airspace is kemunach tamei. It's as if it rested inside. The Chachamim metarin. The Chachamim say no, it's tar. It never went into the interior, and therefore it's tar. Ubahapligi. The Rabbi Akiva savar kemunach tamei. Rabbi Akiva says that it's like it rested inside. V'Rabbanan savrei lav kemunach dami. It's like it didn't rest inside. Now that was the way Rabbah explained it. But Abaye said that can't be pshat. Nobody holds that roofing over something is going to cause it to be tummy. Like here, Dr. Block passed the flask over the sheretz. So it roofed over it. Roofing over it is not metame except by a corpse or by a leprous stone. So ve'eisvei Abaya moider Rabbi Akiva bahazah. We use spray, the water of the chatas shevira al gabe klei cheres tamei, that you passed over the airspace of a klei cheres that had a sheretz in it, or al gabe mishkav u'moishav tamei, or the couch or the seat of a nida that was tamei, or a zav that was tamei. You sprayed it over that. Shehi tahira. We don't say it's as if it rested upon it. She'ein loch davar shemetame lamala kilmata. There's not anything that's metami when it goes over the airspace, like if it went inside, ella, except for kazayas minames, an olive size of a corpse, because that's metami ba'oil, so it's metami if something roofs over it. V'shar kol amali, and anything else that's metami ba'oil, which includes an even amanugas, a leprous stone. But passing over. We don't say that it's kemunach dami. El amra baya de kuli alma lav kemunach dami. When Dr. Block stretches his hand and brings the flask and passes it over the airspace of the oven with the sheretz in it, nobody holds that it's as if it rested inside. I said, and why does Rabbi Akiva say it's tamei? V'acha b'hakamiflagi. Rabbi Akiva savar gazrinon shema yanuach. Rabbi Akiva says we're afraid because remember by the mechatas we make a lot of extra special gezeras. So we're afraid that you might come to dip into the interior. V'Rabbanan savrei loy gazrinon. So then why does Rabbi Kiva hold that when you spray it and it passes over the earth and the vessel, that it's tar? Umaydu Rabbi Kiva ba'azah, kaven the nafik. Once it left his hand, we're not worried that you're going to dip inside anymore, and that's why it's tar. Then v'Rebbe Eliezer v'Rabbanan. Rebbe Eliezer and Rabbanan, when Rebbe Eliezer says that you could do hazah with Tomei Dika Meichatas. Now the Rabbanan argue, and they hold that you can't do hazah with Tomei Dika Meichatas. What are they arguing about? Getting back to our subject. Says the Gemara, V'Rebbe Eliezer v'Rabbanan b'may kamiflagi. Says the Gemara, it's a ganz andere Maße. Amar Abaya, bidonin tuma keduma mit tuma sheba oisa shaka miflagi. They're arguing whether you learn out tuma that happened before from tuma that's simultaneous. Because remember, he wanted to learn it out that we see that you could spray a nida. But that's, the tumah happened simultaneously, because before it touched the nida, it was tar dika meichatas. That's tumah ba'isashah. Tumah keduma is if the water was tameh from before. Mar savar, one holds donin. We could learn out, and we could say that just like it's simultaneous, it's good, because after all, when the water touches the nida, it becomes tameh, and yet it makes her tar. Umar savar ain't done, and that's different, because at the time of contact it was tar. But if it was tameh, meichatos was tameh beforehand, that's no good. Rav Amar dekuli alma ain't done it. You can't learn out from the nida, because the nida there it was simultaneous. The water was tameh when it came into contact with her. That's no raya that Tomei Dika water, Tomei Dika meichatas could do cleansing. V'hacha b'ha kamiflagi. Here they're arguing that when you do a nida, the hazah, the sprinkling needs an amount. And he holds that the sprinkling combines. So if you spray a nida, you did a little, and then you do a little bit more. And it's only good because it combines. Now, if the second part has to combine with the first part was already tameh. So it's not simultaneous. And yet you see it's good. So then that's a clear raya to Rebbe Eliezer that tameh meichatas could be used. Says the Gemara, let's see it inside. Rav Amar dekuli alma ain't done it. You wouldn't be able to learn out from simultaneous. But ba'acha kamiflagi. The Rebbe Eliezer savar hazah tzricha shir, that you need a amount for the hazah. And therefore, when you spray the nida, you're going to have to combine a few sprayings. Umitztarfin la'azais, and you could combine them. Now, if you're combining them, that means this, when you do the second hazah, the first hazah already became tameh because it came in contact with the nida. And then you're combining it together with the second one, even though it was already tameh. That's not simultaneous anymore. So therefore, you see that the meichatas could be itar even if it's tameh. Rabbanan sabri hazah ain't tzricha shir. There's no shir, and therefore this is only a simultaneous. You can't learn out from a simultaneous to where it is. Rabbi Kranz, could you do anything about the feedback, or you don't? While according to the Rabbanan, yes, I got interrupted. According to Rebbe Eliezer, it's mitzdarif, so that means that the original hazah was tameh, and you see that although it was tameh, you could combine it with the second one, so you see that mechatas that's tameh you could purify, while according to Rabbanan you don't have to be mitzdarif, and since you don't have to be mitzdarif, you see that it's only where it's a tumah dahashta, where it's simultaneous. That's no raya that if it was already tameh, that it could purify. Yes, Rabbi Kranz.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was wondering why bring a case of a nida. You could already bring a case of a mace. Every time a person is mazer a mace, if you have a second hazar, you don't have to come on to nida.
That's no raya, because that's what the Torah says. So that's what the Torah says. That could be Gzeres HaKosef. Now, wow, we have 30 people on a Chanukah night. Wow. So we welcome in Mo Kushner, Mel Zachter, Baruch Ian, Dr. Guy, Shalom Fogel, Ruven Pollack, Yaakov Warman, Irving Fishbaum, Shelley Zeitlin, Gedalia Engel, Rebellia Yaffe, Shimon Klein, Yisrael Fisher, Yitzi Fuchs, Eddie Chazan, Nachman Chapler, Michal, Dr. Black, Rabbi Kranz, Sumizund, not sure, Menachem Yemansky, still in Eretz Yisrael? Wow, it's early in the morning there. Moshe Lehman, Stephen Holtzman, Danny Vogel, Ilya Shutman, Yitzi Mahler, Yeshua Shmuel Eisenberg, Abe Arbach, Abraham Rezepkowitz, Naftali Jabnatz, big Mesiris Nefesh Menachem. Menachem, it's wonderful to have you from the Holy Land. Here in Shul, we have Berish Gesseman, Chaim Kramer, Michal Avram Chavin, and Ruvain Shannet. So now the Gemara says, Chatas Psula.
Is that what we're holding?
Yes, we are holding by Chatas Psula on Daf Tzad Gimel Amud Aleph, and we're holding 12 lines from the bottom.
Thank you.
No. Now, Chatas Psula, we said that if a Chatas that's puzzled sprays on a beged, it doesn't have to be washed. Tan Rabbanan, there's a miyat, midama, from its blood, from and not all of its blood. Midam kashera, you only have to wash it if it's kosher dam, v'loy midam psula, not if it's puzzle dam. Rabbi Kiva says it depends. If it was once good and it was just disqualified b'yaitze, or if it was left overnight, v'nifsala, still, since it had a shasa kaisha, damata and kibbutz, you need to wash it. Lo yaisala shasa kaisha. If it didn't have a shasa kaisha, if it was, let's say, shechted with a machshav of pigel, so it was no good from the get-go, v'nifsala, then ein damata and kibbutz. Reb Shimon says it makes no difference, even if it has shasa kaisha, echad zeh, ein damata and kibbutz. Either way, the blood doesn't need to be washed. My time with Reb Shimon, because there's two miyutim. Ksiv osa, it says osa, it, which implies it and not something else. V'ksiv midama, from its blood. Chad laheicha dahoisa la shasa kaisher. One is where it had a shasa kaisher, and one is where it didn't have a shasa kaisher. So you have two miyutim. Now Rabbi Akiva, who doesn't hold of the miyut of oisa, what does Rabbi Akiva use it for? Rabbi Kiva Oisa Prat Truma. Oisa tells me that Truma does not need Marika Ushtifa, doesn't need to be purged and rinsed when you cook Truma in the vessel. Reb Shimon Tamei, Reb Shimon says, I don't need that, because I hold that even Kachim Kalim doesn't need Marika and Shtifa, and then surely Truma won't need Marika and Shtifa. Reb Shimon Tamei, Dama Kachim Kalim ain't to the Marika and Shtifa, and then Mekosh and Truma, and therefore I don't need Osa to be Mamayet Truma. Now, new Mishnah. Nitas minatzavar ala beged. If the blood doesn't spurt from the clay showers, it spurts from the neck. Ein ton kibbutz. The garment doesn't need kibbutz. Minakeren, if the blood rebounds off the corner. Minayeside, off the base. Ein ton kibbutz. Nishbach ala ritzba, if it spills on the floor, v'asvu ein ton kibbutz, because ein ton kibbutz, the only time you need to launder the garment, eladamshin is kabel b'keli, it's only if it was caught in the vessel, v'roi lazah, and it's fit to be sprayed. Says the Gemara as we rehash this, Tan Rabbanan, Yochel nitas minatzaver ala beged. I might think that if it sprays from the neck on the clothing, yehi ton kibbutz, I might think that it needs to be washed. Talmud Leimer asher yazeh, which you spray. Lo amarti lach ela beroi lazah. It has to be fit to be sprayed. It had to be caught in the clay shares and fit to be sprayed. Tani idach. Yochel mitas min hakeren min side. I might think if it sprays from the corner or from the base, yehi ton kibbutz. Talmud Leimer asher yazeh, which you are going to spray. Prat lezeh, that excludes this shekvar uza, that it was already sprayed. Now, nishbach ala ritzpa, if it fell on the floor, well, you know a daf has a lot of stuff when there's 5 pages of art scroll on one amud. And you know, it was a detailed daf. So now we turn to Daf Tzad Gimel base. Says Gemara Hasu Lamali. We already said that it has to be fit to be sprayed. So the Gemara says, no, this is only Pirushe Kama Farish. Matam Kama. What's the reason? Matam Nishbach ala Ritzba or Asbo. Why, if it's spilled on the floor and you gather it, Ein Ton Kibbutz? Because that's not fit to be sprayed. Lefisha Ein Ton Kibbutz. Ela damshin is kabel b'keli. If it was caught in a clay sharis, v'roi lazaya. Once it falls straight on the floor, it's not fit. Now, it has to be roi lazah. It already says that it has to be caught in a clay sharis. What is it coming to add that it has to be fit to be sprayed? The Gemara says that if you catch less than the amount of hazah in separate vessels, it's no good. Because you have to have in a vessel the shir hazah. Even if you mix it afterwards, it's no good. So roi lazah l'ma'utei mai, l'ma'utei kibul pachas mikdei hazah b'klei zeh, where you caught less than the shir of spraying in one vessel, or pachas mikdei hazah b'klei zeh. So then, since that's not fit, if it sprays on the baguette, it won't need to be laundered. Now the Gemara brings a raya from making an analogy to the mechatas. The din is by the mixing of the water with the ash of the paraduma, there too you cannot mix in different vessels less than the amount. The Tanya, Rabbi Chalafta Bar Shol Oimer, Kidesh Pochas Mikdei Azoya B'Klizeh, if you mix ash with Mayim Chayim less than the necessary amount in one vessel, or Pochas Mikdei Azoya B'Klizeh, like Kiddush, that doesn't sanctify, it's no good. Ibaylu, so the Gemara says, okay, well that's the halacha by Mechatas. B'Damau, how do I know that the same thing is true by the blood of the karbanas? Do we say hilchasahi that the din by paraduma is halacha l'Moshe Messina, and halacha Moshe Messina we don't learn from. Because maybe it's only halacha Moshe Messina there. Oidil mahasa my time the chsiv. And this is a good example of where the Baal Korah makes a mistake. He has to read it again. There's a difference between v'tovel b'mayim and v'tovel b'mayim. V'tovel b'mayim means dip it in water. V'tovel b'mayim means that water. And it means the water that we are going to mix the hyssop and the scarlet and dip it in, so it has to be a shear. So we learn out the toval ba'mayim. You have to have the full shear of water, that water. Hachanami ksiv, it doesn't say v'tovel b'dam, it's v'tovel badam. You have to have the full shear of the blood. So the Gemara says, well, it's true. It's by karbanis also. Tajma, the Amar Rab Zrika, Amar Rab Elazar, af b'dam, also by blood. Like kiddush, it's not good unless you have the whole shear in one klei sharis. Now, the Gemara tells us a related halacha. This happens to be talking about the chatois hapnimiyos, the rear sin offerings that are offered inside the kodesh, like the par helam davar shel tzibur, the par koyin Mashiach, etc. So Tajma, the Amar Rab Zrika, Amar Rab Elazar, Amar Rava, Tanya, we learned in a Braisa, v'toval, you have to dip your finger in the blood, v'loy misafeg. You can't sponge it from the side of the keli. Badam, achiyeh, badam shir tefillah. You need to have in the kais, in the keli, enough for all the dippings. From the beginning. Min adam, so when it says min adam, it means min adam shebe'inyan. Now, this is a very enigmatic statement that it says min adam shebe'inyan. It has to be from the blood, which is discussed before in the pasuk. In other words, this is a different halacha. This halacha tells me that you have to make a separate, when they do the 7 sprays, you need to dip your fingers 7 times. You can't do it 2 times from what was left on the finger. And as the Gemara will elaborate, v'yitzrich lemichta badam, it has to say badam. De'ikas rachman v'taval havamina. I might think that you don't have to have the shear of all of the dippings in the klei sharis from the get-go. Havamina afal piduleka shear tefila meikra. You don't have to have the full amount in the keli. So therefore, kasser rachman badam, in that blood, you have to have the full amount. V'yikas rachman badam, I would say that you don't have to dip it. You could sponge it. Havamino afilu misafeg. You could even sponge it from the side. So kasser rachmana v'tavel, you dip it. Min dam shebe inyan lemutei mai. What does it mean from the dam which is mentioned? Amar Rava lemutei shirayim shebe etzba. It's coming to exclude the remnants on the finger. You have to make 7 dippings. You can't dip it once, spray it, and then spray it with what's left over on the finger. Messiah Rabbi Elazar, the Amar Rabbi Elazar, Shirayim Shebe Etzba Psulin. The remnants on the finger are puzzle. Amalei Ravim Baravadol Rav, Amar Talmidcha, Amar Rav Amram. Your Talmud said in the name of Rav Amram, Tanina, Hayamaza, if he was sprinkling, V'nitza Hazah B'yadai, and some of his sprinkling got onto the garment. Actually, if he didn't spray yet, ton kibbutz. Mishihiza, but if he sprayed, ain't ton kibbutz. Now the Gemara thinks that means if he finished doing the 7 sprayings. Ma'alav hakikama actually gomar melahazais ton kibbutz. If you didn't do all 7, it needs kibbutz. So that implies that even if you sprayed once and sprayed and sprayed a second time from the finger, it would be good. Says the Gemara, the shigam lahazais ain't toin kibbutz. Says the Gemara, no, that's not what it means. Hakikama actually yatzasazam yadai. If you didn't spray yet from your finger, and it got onto the beged, ton kibbutz. But once you did one spray, ain't ton kibbutz, because the rest of the blood on the finger is possible, because you have to make another dipping. So if the rest of the blood got on the beged, it wouldn't need to be washed. Eisve Abaya, Gamar melahazais, when he finished spraying, so now what does he do with the rest of the blood that's on his hand? Mikaneach yodoi begufa shel par. This is talking about the para aduma, and he sprays 7 times towards the oil mayed. What does he do with the remnant of the blood that now has to be burnt? Mikaneach yodoi begufa shel par. He dries his hand onto the body of the cow, because that's going to be burnt. But gamar in, only if he finished. Loy gamar loy. But if he didn't finish, then he doesn't have to wipe it. So you see that you could use the remnant of the blood on your finger for extra sprayings. Amalei, no. Gamar mekaneach yodai begufa shalpa. When he finishes at the end, and he doesn't have to spray anymore, he could wipe his hand on the body of the cow. Loy gamar, we don't want him to wipe his hand on the body of the cow, because then he'll get finger here, and he doesn't want it to be mixed with the subsequent spraying. What he does is mekaneach etzbai, he dries his finger, because he can't do the remnant of the blood for the next spray, and we'll see he's going to wipe his finger on the edge of the clay sharis. So bishleim agama mekaneach yada begufi shel par, because then the rest of the blood has to be burnt. Shenema v'saraf es apar le'enav. They burn the cow together with the ar and the meat and the blood. Ela etzbo b'may mekaneach. In between sprayings, what does he rub his finger on? Amar Abaya b'svas mizrak, on the edge of the bowl. And the Gemara brings an interesting etymological proof. Kedichsiv, kiforei zav, bowls of gold. But the word kifar also means to wipe, like Yom Kippur, the day when our sins are wiped away, because you use it to wipe the blood. Now, says the Mishnah, we're learning a lot of stuff tonight, a lot of stuff. To learn on Hanukkah, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvarav. As I said, there are many Hanukkah parties. Here, my mother is going to be in Mirz Hashem this Sunday. We're making a Hanukkah party. There'll probably be 100 people there. Here's a woman that escaped from Budapest from the Nazis at the age of 2 years old. At the age of 2 years old, 1939, she was 2 years old. And now she's with 100 Yotzei Chalotzev. That's our answer to Hitler. And he tried lahashmid lara gilabed es kol Yehudim. So here we are learning on Hanukkah the mighty military might of Antiochus and the Yevonim. They wanted to stamp out the Torah, lashkicham Torasecha, and look at us. Look at us. Hashem is very proud of us. Okay, nitas ala or. If the blood sprayed on the hide, if the hide was not yet skinned from the animal, ain't a ton kibbutz, because while it's attached to the animal, it's definitely not a davar shemekabel tumah. Once it's flayed, so that's something that's going to eventually be susceptible to tumah, then that is ton kibbutz. Div Rabbi Yehuda. However, that's only the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Lazar says it's still not a keli, that's kabel tuma, unless you tan it or you prepare it, you make a mat at it. Rabbi Eliezer Aimer af mishahufshit ein ton kibbutz. It doesn't need to be washed until it's made into a keli. Now, ein a ton kibbutz ela mekayim adam. The only thing that needs kibbutz is the place of the blood, not the whole baguette. And v'davashu roya lekabel tuma, something that's fit to be mekabel tuma. V'roya lekibbutz, it has to be something that's fit for washing, not a keli that would need scraping. The Gemara will explain. Echad ha-beged v'echad ha-sak v'echad ha-or, clothing, sack, and hide tu'unin kibbutz. V'kibbutz b'makom kadosh, the washing has to be in the azara. Ushviras kleicheres, and when we break earthenware vessels, because they absorb the kachim, and it's going to become nicer, and there's no way to purge kleicheres, that's done b'makom kadosh, which they miraculously absorbed in the ground. Umarika shtifa b'klei nechoshes, and the purging and rinsing of metal, copper kalim, has to be done b'makom kadosh. If you remember, Barry had asked me, is this din of washing only by chatas? This is a chumrah of kachei kachim over kachim kalim, that if the blood sprays, it doesn't need to be laundered. Okay, Rabbi, say another wonderful daf in the books. We want to remind you that in Yirtz Hashem, tomorrow will be also a Chanukah shir.